Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 9. At this point, we're talking about non-Mendelian genetics. Non-Mendelian genetics means, on the surface, it makes it sound like it doesn't follow Mendel's idea of what genetics is. Underlying these so-called non-Mendelian genetics are still Mendel's traits. It's just that there's a bunch of conditions that Mendel didn't know about. But they still follow the same basic idea of dominant and recessive. Let's talk about something called incomplete dominance. And incomplete dominance actually kind of does break Mendel's idea, but to be fair, it's really about the only one that does. Incomplete dominance says that the dominant trait does not fully hide the recessive trait. Okay, so it's a really good thing that Mendel didn't use snapdragons to try to figure out genetics, because then he would have been really confused. You know, if you don't understand genetics and you say, well, I'm going to breed a red flower with a white flower, what should their children be? If you don't understand genetics, you'd say, oh, well, it's going to be a pink flower because you combine red and white. If I combine red paint with white paint, what do I get? I get pink paint, okay? And that's actually what happens with snapdragons. If I cross a red flower with a white flower, I actually do get a pink flower. The red does not fully cover up the white. That's that F1 generation. Remember, the first summer, I plant my true rooters and I get red and white flowers. I cross them together. Second summer, this is their kids. I end up and I look in my field and I have nothing but pink flowers. I cross the pink flowers together in the F2 generation. Let's talk about that F2 generation. If I mix red paint and white paint, I get pink paint. But if I mix pink paint and pink paint, what do I get? I get a lot of pink paint. Would I ever be able to get red or white back out of it? And the answer is no. If you truly blended them together, there's no way to get red and white back out. And that is what happens with incomplete dominance. And that is that, yes, I get pink flowers, but only two of them, the heterozygous ones. I get one red, which is the homozygous dominant, and I get one white, which is the homozygous recessive. This one actually shows a phenotypic ratio that matches the genotypic ratio. This might actually have been a little bit easier for Mendel to figure out. He would have known then, oh, one red per two pink to one white, two that show the original color of the grandparents, and two that show the color of the parents. 1 to 2 to 1. Incomplete dominance. And remember, with incomplete dominance, the dominant does not fully cover up the recessive. Next is codominance. Codominance and incomplete dominance are similar. The difference is, and the primary difference is, with codominance, you have to have more than two versions of a gene. When we talk about genes, we often talk about how there's just two versions of them. There's the purple or the white. There's the red or the white. There's the tall or the short. There's the yellow or the green. That's not the case in all things. Some things, there's not just two versions of a gene. In the case of human blood types, there are three versions of the gene. There is the A version of the gene, which gives you type A blood. There's the B version of the gene, which gives you type B blood. And then there's the O version of the gene, which gives you type O blood. Three versions of one condition, and that is, what type is your blood? The gene is blood type. A, B, and O are the versions. So if we look at it easiest and think about, let's look at A. To have type A blood, your options are, you can have two copies of the A gene, or you can have an A and an O. Remember, we said A is dominant, B is dominant, O is recessive. So if I get two A genes from my parents, it means I have type A blood. If I get an A and an O gene, one from my mom, one from my dad, I still have type A blood. What does type A blood mean? It means that I have a particular molecule on the surface of my red blood cells, and in this case it is the A variety. B is dominant, So if I get 2 copies of the B gene, I'll have type B blood. If I get a B and an O, B is dominant, O is recessive, I still have type B blood. B is a different kind of molecule on the surface of the red blood cell. If I get 2 B genes, I have type B blood. If I have a B and an O, I still have type B blood. The only way to get type O blood, O is recessive. What is the only way to get the recessive trait? And that is to have 2 copies of the recessive gene. O means I don't have either the A or the B on my cell surface. I have nothing on the cell surface. That's what type O blood means. O means 0. O means nothing. What's on the surface of my red blood cells? Nothing's on the surface. A is dominant over O. B is dominant over O. A and B are not dominant over each other. If I get an A gene and a B gene, which one wins? Am I type A or am I type B? And the answer is, you're both. We call it type AB. You have the A molecule on your cell surface, and you have the B molecule on your cell surface. You are type AB. All right? This is called codominance. A and B are both dominant over O, but they're not dominant over each other. Type A, type B, type O, type AB. Next is sex-linked traits. All right, so we talked in the previous chapter, chapter 8, we talked about the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y. And remember that the X has 2,500 genes on it, and the Y has 25 genes on it. So women, to be a woman, you have 2 X chromosomes. To be a man, you have 1 X and 1 Y. So for a man, it means that I've got the other 22 pairs and they're fine. It's no big deal. It's just this last pair, this sex pair, that makes the difference. And that is that for almost all of the genes on that X that I get from my mother, I don't have a corresponding mate on the Y. Which means most of the time, to show the recessive trait, I have to have 2 copies of the recessive gene. One I got from mom and one I got from dad. But what if I only get 1 copy of that gene, as is the case for most of the 2,500 genes on the X? If I only get 1 copy of that gene, and I only get it from my mom, because the Y doesn't have a corresponding match on it, that means that if I get a recessive one from mom, that's the only one I have. I can't fall back on a dominant version that I might have gotten from dad, because I didn't get a dominant version from dad, because dad gave me this itty-bitty little thing called a Y. All right? Sex-linked. And so examples of sex-linked traits, the best one that you probably know of is, who is more likely to be colorblind, a man or a woman? And the answer is men are most likely to be colorblind, and that is because colorblindness is a sex-linked trait. It is dominant to be able to distinguish between red and green. It is recessive to not be able to distinguish between red and green. That gene happens to be on the X chromosome. If you get the recessive version on your X from your mom, and you're a man, the Y does not have a corresponding match on it, which means that's the only version you get. That means, well, that's the one I'd use, so therefore I'm colorblind. If a woman's father is colorblind, she will carry the colorblindness gene, and half of her sons will be colorblind. If a man is colorblind, there is 0 chance that he will cause his son to be colorblind. Because where did his son get his X from? If he's a son, he had to get a Y. Who did he have to get the Y from? He had to get it from daddy. Where is the color blindness gene? It's on the X. The son had to get his X from whom? From mama. But his daughters got one X from mom and his bad X from him. So daughter carries that one bad X. Her sons, she's got a 50-50 shot. She could either give the good one she got from her mother that doesn't have the color blindness gene on it, or she could give the bad one that she got from her dad and give him the color blindness gene. If you have a woman that is colorblind, it's rare, but it does happen. If you have a woman that is colorblind, she has both of her X's have the bad color blindness gene on it. Every one of her sons will be colorblind because she has no choice but to give the bad color blindness gene. Sex-linked trait means this particular trait is inherited on the X chromosome. This is specifically showing hemophilia. Hemophilia is also a sex-linked trait. It means people that don't make proper clotting agents, and so when they get cut, they bleed a lot. Queen Victoria carried it. Her daughter Alice carried it. Her daughter Alexandra carried it. Alexei, the child of the Tsar of Russia, had hemophilia, which he got, again, a 50-50 shot. Mom could have given him the good one, but she didn't. She gave him the bad one. And so because he only had one X, that's the one he happened to get from his mother, and so he was a hemophiliac. Hemophilia is sometimes referred to as the royal disease. It runs in the royal family, and it runs in the royal family because they're socially isolated. And socially isolated means they could marry other people to get good genes into the bloodline, but because they are royal, who do they have to marry? Well, back in this time, 100 plus years ago, they had to marry other royals. This graphic, I know you can't see it on the video. I've told you 100 times, make sure that you have the PowerPoints. Look at this graphic because it shows a number of things that are interesting. This is talking about recessive disorders. Recessive disorders actually have a fairly high chance of being lethal. The reason why recessive disorders have a high chance of being lethal is because they can hide. Like that hemophilia hid in the mother because she didn't suffer from it. She carried it, but it showed up in the kid. Dominant disorders are very unlikely to be lethal. And the reason why is if it's lethal, it means it kills you. Who did you have to inherit a dominant disorder from? You had to inherit it from your parent. If that dominant disorder is lethal, then what happened to your parent? Well, they died. So how did they give it to you if they died? Really rare for dominant disorders to be lethal. But there are some. This one right here is called Huntington's disease, and Huntington's disease is a lethal dominant disorder. You just said you can't have lethal dominant disorders. I said it's really rare to have them. The reason why Huntington's is lethal and dominant and still in the population is because it doesn't strike until about age 30. What have most people done by the time they turn 30? Most people, by the time they're 30, have already had kids. This is how a dominant disorder is lethal and still in the population.